أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي ربنا زدنا علما السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Welcome to another episode of Weekly Iman Boosters by Ikna Sisters. So we were talking about how the concept of justice was introduced to the society in Mecca. And Islam did not just offer freedom to the slaves and gave a voice to the marginalized in the community. It offered them a lot more than that, which was never a part of the equation. It offered them dignity and equality. Now we'll see how this concept will keep on getting better and better, especially in Medina, where Muslims are not in minority, and Muhammad ﷺ is going to work on not just making or putting down some rules and regulations based on the word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He is going to work on instilling this deep sense of fairness and a desire to uphold values of justice and equality. And we see that Muhammad ﷺ, through various instances, he kept on reinforcing that color of the skin and ethnicity of a person does not matter at all. It says in Surah Hujurat that Inna akramakum indallahi atqakum. Verily, the most honored in the sight of Allah is that person who is the most righteous. So remember we talked about Bilal radiallahu ta'ala anhu last time and his story of freedom. Imagine that this person, a black slave who was perceived worthless in Mecca, when all these Muslims would return to Mecca at the time of conquest of Mecca, he would be the one who would be granted the honor of calling the adhan from the roof of Kaaba. And such was the treatment of blacks and people of color in Islam. And Muhammad ﷺ had not allowed racism to take root or govern any aspect of the society in Medina. Now, historians have heavily praised how Islam took care of the problem of racism by completely taking it from the minds of people. And one such historian was a British historian, Tony B., who was a professor at London School of Economics. And he has remarked in his book, which was called Civilizations on Trial, and this was published in 1948. And he said that the extinction of race consciousness is one of the most outstanding moral achievements of Islam. There is a crying need for propagation of this Islamic virtue. Now, this sort of equal treatment was not just limited to rules and regulations. Muhammad ﷺ constantly kept in check that his companions had those moral values which demonstrate empathy and fairness. Once, one of the companions of the Prophet ﷺ, Abdullah bin Masud radiallahu ta'ala anhu, was climbing on a tree and was almost blown away by the wind because he was very short and weak. And some of the companions of the Prophet ﷺ, they laughed. And when Muhammad ﷺ called them out and he asked why were they laughing, they said, Ya Rasulullah, his legs are so short, they're like two little twigs. Muhammad ﷺ responded, but you don't understand that these two legs on the day of judgment will be the size and weight of Mount Uhud. So this is very important that Muhammad ﷺ keeps on bringing the focus back to the heart and away from the physical appearance and away from any sort of ridicule in the society. At the same time, he also cared for those who had developed a so low self-esteem because of how people reacted to their physical appearance. And one such case was the case of Zafir radiallahu ta'ala anhu, who was not physically very attractive and had a very low self-esteem. So Muhammad ﷺ recognized that, and he made it a point to recognize him and acknowledge him more than anyone else, so he shouldn't feel that he's lower than anyone because of his physical appearance. Once he saw him in the market, and then he went behind him and hugged him and held him tightly from behind, and he said, jokingly said that, who is going to buy the slave of mine? Who is going to buy the slave of mine? And to that, Zafir radiallahu ta'ala anhu, very disappointedly, he remarked that, Ya Rasulullah, no one would buy me even if I was a slave. Now, such low esteem was very self-degrading, and Muhammad ﷺ would not let that happen. He said, but you are priceless in the sight of Allah, Ya Zafir. You are beautiful in the eyes of Allah. Subhanallah. So such was a society of Medina where people were treated equally, irrespective of their appearance, color, or even religion. that once Muhammad SAW was with Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu, and a Jewish man came to him and very harshly demanded the return of a loan which was due in a couple of days. It was not the time yet, but he was very harsh in his demand. And this really angered Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu. He was very furious with him and he was on the verge of beating him up. At that point, Muhammad SAW intervened. It was like he stopped Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu and he said that, Umar, I expect better from you. You could have asked me to pay it on time and you could have asked him to ask for it more nicely. And right at that moment, the Jewish man revealed that all of this was staged and he was just checking if Muhammad SAW possessed the character of a prophet, and he accepted Islam. So the treatment, the fact that a person, whether he was Muslim or non-Muslim, would come to Muhammad SAW asking for and demanding that my loan has to be given back to me, was treated with respect, and there was nothing which would stop the Prophet SAW from treating him equally as the other people. Now, moving on, one of the huge accomplishments of that time was creating a system of redistribution of wealth. We all know how Islam prohibited usury and interest and obligated the annual tax in the form of zakat and institutionalized Baitul Mal for the needy. All of this was extremely revolutionary. But what was extraordinary about all of this was developing a deep sense of responsibility in the rich towards the poor without ever compromising the dignity of the poor. Let's look at the example of Abdurrahman bin Auf radiallahu ta'ala, who was one of the Ashray Mubashira, the 10 promised Jannah. And he was so rich that when he used to come back to Medina with his trade caravans, people used to think that an army has come to attack them. At the same time, Islam created this deep sense of gratitude and accountability in such people, where he knew that prosperity here in this world did not and will not translate in the prosperity in the hereafter. It was due to these spiritual checks that we see that rich in that society were so generous. And Abdurrahman bin Auf would always make dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to protect him from a shuh or greed. He also reportedly freed 30,000 slaves. At the same time, this was a society which took care of the needs of a person like Abu Hurairah radiallahu ta'ala anhu, who did not have a home, and Muhammad SAW would himself sometimes arrange for his food without making him feel embarrassed by having to ask for it, not letting the dignity of these people get compromised. These days, we try to make the homeless people disappear from our cosmopolitan cities or metropolitans by doing a cosmetic arrangement where we make the homeless disappear, as opposed to taking care of the homelessness, the problem of homelessness. What did Muhammad SAW do with these people? He put them right at the masjid. These Ahl Sufa and their needs had to be taken care by the society. And eventually we see that all these Sahabas all became ulama, and they made it. They were able to buy houses in the city of Madinah. Now we see that with the implementation of divine law in the society of Madinah, which pretty much dealt with all aspects of human life, whether it was to do with dealing with minorities or speaking up for the rights of the marginalized, women, or taking care of the needy, or whether it was to do with revolutionizing the treatment of prisoners of war by giving them rights. This was a society where minorities felt comfortable bringing their problems to the Prophet ﷺ rather than taking them elsewhere. So the introduction of Islamic law in the society of Medina resulted in forming a just society with moral values and a sense of deep concern for others, where evils and corruptions from the society would gradually disappear. And that was the whole purpose of creating these laws, a general uplift of people where there is no injustice, and people in this society not only recognized and called out injustice, they also looked at crimes with a sense of disgust without criminalizing or demonizing the criminals, because these laws are made to create just societies rather than increasing the number of prisoners or people in the prison, which is what we have here in the United States, unfortunately. We have the highest number of incarcerated in the whole world. Now, Islam also created appropriate and proportionate response to the crimes. Some people here are put away for life for trivial crimes and are not offered a second chance back at life. Now, there was a secret ingredient in the society of Medina, which we don't see elsewhere. Sometimes we recognize that there are some just laws in a lot of societies, but the result is very different from what happened in the society of Medina. The seerah is filled with so many ahadith of the Prophet ﷺ, where he encouraged people to stand up against racism and to stand up against inequality. But the secret ingredient which made Medina a success story was Muhammad ﷺ tirelessly working towards igniting a passion in the hearts of people, infusing them with this sense of empathy and the sense of fairness, which and all these Sahabas constantly working towards that goal as well with Muhammad ﷺ. It was by creating a society of people who were conscious of these issues and were working tirelessly towards establishing justice in the society. Now, if we study the life of the Prophet ﷺ, we will get so many examples and so many ahadith encouraging people to uphold justice. But the purpose of this talk was to understand how Muhammad ﷺ was able to do that on a grassroots level. How was he able to nurture this sense of empathy in people? And with this dua that we are able to nurture such feelings of justice in our societies and in our hearts, I will end this session, inshallah. Subhanaka Allahumma wa bihamdika nashhadu an la ilaha illa anta nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.